You're about to hear something that you probably think you already know, but stay with me for a moment, because this isn't about knowing. It's about noticing, and there's a massive difference between the two. Knowing is collecting information. Noticing is seeing what's always been there, but you never truly saw. And most people completely confuse the two. They think they're living, but they're just responding to what they were taught, responding to what they repeated, responding to what was placed inside them, and calling it my life. But let me ask you something simple, something almost no one asks. If everything you think, feel, decide comes from patterns built over time, then who's really living your life? You or the pattern? Feel that discomfort? It shows up fast and disappears even faster because your mind was trained to avoid questions like that. And that's not by accident. The less you question, the easier it is to stay the same. And the more you stay the same, the less you notice. And that's the cycle. Silent, automatic, invisible. You wake up, do the same things, think the same thoughts, feel the same emotions, and at the end of the day, you call that progress. But there's a moment, and maybe you felt this, a strange moment, where everything seems normal, but at the same time, deeply wrong. Nothing broke, nothing went wrong, but something doesn't fit. A subtle restlessness, almost imperceptible, easy to ignore, but impossible to completely erase. And this is where everything begins. Not when you learn something new, but when something inside you starts to question what has always felt normal, dangerous, right? Because if normal isn't really normal, then what else have you accepted without realizing? Your brain doesn't show you reality. It shows you a useful version of it, filtered, simplified, distorted when necessary. Not to deceive you, but to keep you functioning. But there's a side effect. You start confusing interpretation with reality. And when that happens, questioning feels uncomfortable, and discomfort becomes something to avoid. So you distract yourself. More content, more stimulation, more noise, always too busy to notice. But here's the point that changes everything. The more distracted you are, the less you observe yourself. And the less you observe yourself, the less you exist consciously. Now, pay attention to this. More than 90% of your decisions happen without you noticing. Automatic, predictable, programmed. So let me rephrase that question. Are you really choosing or just reacting really fast? And before you try to answer, notice your mind trying to escape, changing the subject, distracting itself, denying. That's the pattern, protecting itself. Because noticing this changes everything. And real change is rare for a simple reason. It requires presence, real presence. Not the surface level, I'm paying attention, but the kind where you observe even your own thoughts as they happen. And that almost no one does. Because when you start observing, you start seeing patterns. Patterns in your reactions, patterns in your fears, patterns in your choices. And most of all, patterns you were convinced were who you are, but they're not. They were learned, repeated, reinforced, and now they're running on their own, like a program, silent, efficient, automatic. Now imagine this. What if there's something inside you that isn't part of that program? Something that observes, but doesn't automatically react. Something that notices before the pattern takes over. That changes everything. Because in that small space between stimulus and response, there's something rare. Freedom. But it's subtle, almost invisible. And that's why almost no one notices it. Now try something simple. Pause for a few seconds. Take a deep breath and bring your attention to the center of your forehead. No imagining, no forcing, just observe. Maybe nothing happens. Maybe a slight focus appears. But notice the essential part. You chose where to place your attention, and that already breaks the autopilot. Now come back and understand this clearly. Most people never do something this simple. They never pause, never observe, never realize they're living inside the same cycle. Thought, emotion, reaction, result, reinforcement, repetition. different days, same internal experience. But when you start observing, something slowly shifts. No extreme effort, no magic formulas, just observing. You create space, and in that space, you begin to truly exist. And that isn't comfortable at first. You see things you used to avoid. You notice inconsistencies. You recognize old patterns, including within yourself. But at the same time, you gain something most people never develop: clarity. And clarity can't be unseen. Once you notice, you don't go back to the same level of unconsciousness. And that's why many people stop halfway, because noticing more changes your choices, your relationships, your habits, the way you see everything. But it also brings you closer to something real. No filters, no heavy distortions, just perception. Now, the decision is simple. Stay on autopilot or start observing. Not tomorrow, not later, now. Because this moment is the only place where you can truly notice. Everything else is just the pattern running. Comfortable, predictable, automatic. But if something here made you pause for a second, if something here cracked your sense of certainty, then you've already started. And almost no one realizes, but this is exactly how everything changes. Slowly, silently, internally, invisible at first, but irreversible after. So tell me, are you going back to autopilot, or are you going to keep noticing? If you made it this far, then comment, "I started noticing," because sometimes, that's all it takes to separate those who stay in the cycle from those who finally step out of it.